It's going to feel like leftover Christmas candy today. I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. Yes, leftover Christmas candy. Almost said Halloween candy. That'd be worse. Christmas candy. So, like I said, it's going to be, I feel like leftover Christmas candy today because we're reviewing the Nativity story in the New Testament, and there's a temptation to say, hey, look, we just studied this a couple of weeks ago. I already got it. This is a rerun. Well, how many times have you seen Indiana Jones? If it's good, you don't mind watching a rerun. So let's get into it. So we're all familiar with the story. We reviewed it a couple of weeks ago, and we're probably doing it again right now. And I hope you're doing it where it's less stressful, where you're not getting caught up with the ritual. Okay, let's read this. This is our program. Okay, let's get out let's reenact the nativity scene. Let's go over to our creche. People collect them. Do what I did when I was a little kid. Stick a Yoda in the manger. Do this. We're actually studying the gospel without any stress, without any ceremony, where we can take time to stop and think about it. I'm not a big fan of these reading goals, just because it amounts to, as people put it off, and just trying to do it to meet the goal rather than to come into Christ. So as you're reading, pay attention to the people: Joseph, Mary, Gabriel, Simeon, Anna, Herod, the wise men. We don't know how many there were. That's kind of the tradition that accrued around the Christmas story. And pay attention to Jesus. What roles do they play? And as you think about the roles that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus play, what roles do you play? And the answer to that question is, well, what's your church calling? Being part of a family is a church calling. We never think of church callings as something the bishop or the stake president gives you, but actually when you get married in the temple, the family becomes an organization within the church. It's not assigned a unit number, but it's a church organization because you're married in the temple. So what role do you play in your family, your church calling? Look at your patriarchal blessing. Look at your ministering assignment. Those are clues to what roles you play. And are you magnifying them the same way that Joseph, Mary, and everyone else magnified the nativity story? Here's another thing to think about. Versus point 2 is, as you're reading the Gospels, think about historical events and doctrinal realities. That as you're reading the history, extrapolating doctrine from it. This is a little bit like what we do in English class, where you read a book, read Moby Dick or Tom Sawyer or what have you, and extrapolate principles from there, or any of Charlotte's Web or what have you, and extrapolate principles from there. We're doing the same thing with scriptures, although these are historical documents. Now, they're not historical in the way that we understand them, or we'd write a biography, but this is how they did things anciently. So when you read the Doctrine and Covenants, section 20, it starts out with a list of historical events that happened. You actually see a very oblique reference to the first vision in section 20. That's really the earliest account we have of the first vision, is in section 20. And just look closely, you can find it. It'll be a nice Easter egg and a surprise for you when we start doing church history again. So you read about early events in church history in the modern dispensation. Then when you hit verse 17 in section 20, it says, by these things we know. And so from all the historical events in church history, he said, okay, we know these things and we understand these certain principles of the gospel. And you can do the same thing when you're reading the New Testament. As you read the historical events, extrapolate doctrine from it. Point 3, yes, we're going right to the Christ quotient. And with my previous broadcast, I talked about the subject matter, then say, okay, here's the Christ quotient. New Testament, at least for the Gospels, everything's Christ quotient. So the key thing is Jesus' birth. And we need to understand the doctrine of Jesus' birth. Elder McConkie said that if you want to study our religion, you need to understand the resurrection. To understand the resurrection, you need to understand the divine sonship. So get a copy of the John Taylor Manual, read chapter 5 and chapter 6, where John Taylor talks about Jesus' birth, the type of body that he had, what the the virgin birth and the divine sonship mean, and also get a copy of the Joseph F. Smith manual. And I provide links to these in the notes section. Read chapter 40, and that has the first presidency statement about the Father and Son, the doctrinal exposition signed by the first presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles. So this isn't Joseph F. Smith's talking. This is the first presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles unitedly issuing the statement. And this is what they said: Jesus Christ is the Son of Elohim, both as spiritual and bodily offspring. That is to say, Elohim is literally the Father of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, and also of the body in which Jesus Christ performed his mission in the flesh, in which body died on the cross and was afterwards taken up by the process of resurrection, is now immortalized, and that is now the immortalized tabernacle of the eternal Spirit of our Lord and Savior. So, yeah, first presidency, yeah, this was a literal sonship. It's not figurative. It's not like we're not reading Buddhism into Jesus Christ where he attained alignment by his own acts. His physical, tangible body was fathered by God, the eternal Father. And that leads us, when you start thinking about the sacrament, is that we have the bread. The bread symbolizes Christ's body. And so one thing is to think about, okay, why do we need to eat the symbol of Jesus' body? Is that kind of cannibalism? I mean, that's the joke that early Romans used against the church. But think about that Christ had a body, and we make this part of the emblems of the covenant is to remember Jesus Christ's body. And it also leads us to think about our bodies, although they're not like the body of Jesus Christ, where it's fathered by God, the eternal Father. There's principles that we can compare between the two, what Jesus Christ did with his body and what we do with our bodies. So that leads into the resurrection. That's where are we at? I do an outline if you go check that. And thank you, Mrs. Bradford, for making us outline all those books when I was in middle school. And we'd have these history books, and she'd make us outline. Interesting, she was also Jewish, too, so this relates to it. But yeah, she made a study outline, and some of these outlines are really helpful, at least for me. So 3C, we're talking about the resurrection. And it's interesting, in the book of Acts, which we'll come to later, you hit chapter 17, and that's where Paul goes to Areopagus or Mars Hill, and he starts preaching about Jesus Christ. So early on, he's preaching about Jesus Christ, and they misunderstand what he's teaching. They think he's preaching about the God Jesus, and also this other God called resurrection. In Greek, the Greek word for resurrection is anastasis or Anastasia. So when Jesus Christ says, "I'm the resurrection and the life," when that gets translated, he probably said it in Aramaic. When it translates into Greek, it says, "I'm the Anastasia and the Zoe." So if you have twin girls, name them Anastasia and Zoe, it'll be really, really spiritual. So Christ, or I should say, Paul talks about it. And then when he gets at Mars Hill, he starts preaching, and he starts coming to the resurrection. And right when he hits the resurrection, the Greek philosophers, the Stoics, etc., they start making fun of him. That's important cultural background, because that's a really interesting event. That's the first time you have the disciples of Jesus and the disciples of Socrates meet. First time you have Christians and philosophers, or the recorded time when we have Christians and philosophers interact. Things go smoothly until you start talking about the resurrection. And Plato, in his book, the Phaedo, Phaedo, and I have another link to it, the Jowett translation, he makes a statement that the philosopher runs away from the body. The Greek philosophers didn't like bodies, and for obvious reasons. Just make a list of all the sicknesses you have. The old saying, the older you get, you don't die at once, you die one part at a time. 1 year this problem, the next year this other problem. You understand why bodies could interfere with philosophy, and we understand this is a fallen body, not a resurrected body. But it was such a problem that the Greeks just blew a fuse when Paul would talk about it. And you understand that's a presupposition about bodies. And it's a little bit different, too, with Hinduism and reincarnation versus resurrection, which we'll get to a little bit later. So when you're studying the nature of bodies and the resurrection, it's Doctrine and Covenants 93, verse 33, Doctrine and Covenants 88, 15, and 16, 93, 33, where it talks about element and tabernacle, have a fullness of joy. Section 88, where it talks about the body and spirit is the soul of man. So a body isn't a soul, a spirit isn't a soul. The soul, you need both of those to be happy. Alma 11 and 2 Nephi 9, where they emphasize the resurrection. Howard W. Hunter put it this way, and this is from chapter 6 of the Howard W. Hunter Manual. He said, without the resurrection, the gospel of Jesus Christ becomes a litany of wise sayings and seemingly unexplainable miracles, but sayings and miracles with no ultimate triumph. No, the ultimate triumph is in the ultimate miracle. For the first time in the history of mankind, one who is dead raised himself into living immortality. A litany of wise saying and seemingly unexplainable miracles. That's the importance of the nativity story. The nativity story gets ritualized and sort of lose its meaning, the doctrinal significance of it, but the importance of Jesus Christ being the divine sonship of Jesus Christ. That's the key to his ability to work out the atonement and the key to the resurrection. And understanding the atonement and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, well, that's the point. Thank you. So if you like this podcast or this lesson I'm doing, I have some less church stuff podcast. It's not quite oriented towards church stuff. It's more some of its commentary, some of its social commentary. I have a Comrade Hotnik, which is when I talk about communist or Russian related stuff, I do him. I have church conundrums and comments, and I'll start be doing more stuff on that now with the new year. But I have other stuff. You feel free to take a look at it or follow me on the social media outlets. I'm on all of them, and I'll put all this information in the notes section. But thank you for your time, and remember, Christ is the point.